Good morning again. I'm Clint Long with WealthSouth, and this is the second installment of Wealth Watch. It's the interactive webcast that we've instituted to talk about the financial industry and the impacts that are being felt in that industry by everything surrounding the coronavirus. If you missed us last week, we had Bud Watson on. Bud talked about required minimum distributions, the impact that federal action had on your tax year 2020 distribution, and then the changes that we'll see going forward. One thing I did forget to mention last week, if you go to WealthSouth.com, or if you look at the bottom attachment to the invitation you received for our webcast today, we're housing all the videos we create and all the communications that go out to our clients on our website. If for whatever reason the link's not working, you can go to WealthSouth.com, and the link to those updates is pretty conspicuous. One thing I did mention last week is, and I'll reiterate, we're not professional television producers. As you may notice, I'm working from home today, so if you hear a dog barking or suddenly a kid flashes into the screen, hopefully the content is better than the production. So today we're going to be discussing financial planning, and we've seen a precipitous drop in the market. A lot of people have questions around how does that affect the financial plan that I created, and we've got Tim Yessen with us today to talk about that. Tim Yessen is a wealth management advisor with us at WealthSouth. He has 30 years experience in the financial industry. Reason I know that is in your invite, I typed that he had 25 and he corrected me. So good morning, Tim.
Good morning. Good morning, everybody.
Tim's really a great resource with this because he's passionate about how vital financial plans are to create good investment outcomes for clients. And so Tim, to start us off this morning, can you maybe just walk us through what financial plans are designed to do?
Hold on just one second. I'm sorry, we might have some technical issues. Nobody can get on? Okay, we got a few people that can't get on apparently on the webcast. So, okay. Clint, are you seeing participants?
We've got a pretty good number of attendees in the room. So
okay. All right, well, let's get going. If it's not broadcasting well, we'll certainly clean it up and get it ready for placement on our website, or maybe have another one at some point. We've got plenty of time to do that. So, Clint, kind of getting back to your question, I think it's best to just revisit what a wealth plan is designed to do. When we started the process at WealthSouth, some of the stuff that we've looked at, there's really a wide range of clients that have different expectations. They all have different needs. But one thing is a common thread through all of it is that the contentment is not there. They don't feel like they have an idea or grasp of whether what they're doing now or in the future is going to get them to retirement, beyond retirement, and meet those goals financially that they want to have. So it's kind of a common thread. Even though people are doing all the right things, it's an abstract concept when you get to retirement and do I have enough money for retirement. Our job with this planning process is to make those abstract concepts, those what am I doing now, to make those concrete and specific. And that's a real critical piece of this. And when you look at it, I know, Clint, you've got the first slide to look at. We look during our wealth planning process at really the accumulation period. Then you got this big bar of retirement, kind of the before and after. And our job is to look at the things that you're doing before retirement to get you to retirement, and then have enough money to last post-retirement, and then any testamentary wishes you have, plan for those now to get those fulfilled in the end. It's a pretty simple process.
So, and we've got that slide up now for people to take a look at. I think another question that we're hearing quite a bit, or maybe some differing opinions that we're hearing is, okay, I've got my financial plan in place. Am I more affected if I'm 10 years out from retirement, or am I more affected if I'm 10 years into retirement?
Certainly the 10 years into retirement. Now, my job through this is to keep you consistent. What we do pre-retirement generally stays the same through post-retirement, but I know people that are in that post-retirement, at retirement, or just beyond retirement are probably feeling this the most, and probably have the most questions about what this COVID-19 and the financial downturn, how that affects them through their retirement. So certainly the post-retirement people are going to be affected most by this.
Okay, so then let's obviously everybody's on today because they want to know, hey, how does this affect me personally? What do I need to reassess? What do I need to focus on? But I think maybe before we get to answering that specifically, can you maybe just help us understand what goes into a financial plan creation on the front end, so we can then better assess how we ask those questions at the point we're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. The process that we use, and it differs from others, the real big part of what we do, because ultimately when we're investing money, that's kind of almost an end game for us in our process. The first part of our process is really understanding our clients' needs and what they need to accomplish with the funds. And it's not just objective, because I think most of the planning out there is really focused on objective outcomes. And objective measures are absolutely necessary, but they're not sufficient. It's really important to understand the subjective measures, your personal history, your family dynamics, and personal values. Those subjective measures are really critical if you want to have the right outcomes. And so it starts with a lot of conversations with our clients to understand where they are, and then coupling those with their objective measures, which are the things that we're going to talk about today.
So, sorry, I'm actually having a little technical difficulty here now. So then we move from that understand process into the engagement process. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the engagement process, once we get the objective measures coupled with those subjective measures, we start working on the data and the analytics. And in that part of it, we develop a baseline using dynamic variables, not static variables. And when I mean dynamic, what I'm talking about, we've got to factor in inflation. We've got to factor in return rates. Taxes, certainly a big part of the equation. All those dynamic measures go into the analytics that we use. And ultimately, what we're after is developing an investment policy statement. So the investment policy statement, along with the wealth plan.
Tim, let me jump in there. Just for the uninitiated, just define what that investment policy statement is and how it's used.
Yeah, the investment policy statement is a customized roadmap for portfolio management, for our portfolio management team. It gives them a guideline for what the strategic allocation is. The strategic allocation is that base allocation. You hear it in the financial industry, oh, you're 60-40, you're 70-30. Usually that first number, well, always that first number is the amount of equities you have in the portfolio, the risk assets, the assets that have more volatility than the other side of the equation, which are the fixed income or the bond portion of the portfolio, the less risky assets. So when you look at that, it's really the end for that investment policy statement is to develop that base allocation, and that allocation is what we work on that's produced through the investment or the wealth planning process. It gives you that baseline of what your risk profile is going to be, and ultimately it's designed to get you to meet your financial goals.
Thanks. So I cut you off in the middle of talking through the engagement process with clients. So apologies for that, but I wanted to make sure everybody understood the purpose of the investment policy statement.
Yeah, we can get pretty jargony here, and I think that's one of the things that we always want to be cognizant of, is that when we talk about these 70-30 and risk assets and non-risk, defining that stuff is really critical, because we've been in this business for a long time, and sometimes you do get jargony, and our job is to make those complex things a lot more simple to understand. And certainly when you have questions along those lines, we want to stop and back up and talk about that kind of stuff. So again, our process, the wealth planning process, is there to produce that investment policy statement, but the two of those go together. to create the outcomes we want for you and for your own unique needs and goals. And so when we develop that, it's never an end for us. The wealth planning process is ongoing. Things change throughout lives. Stuff pops up, and we've never taken the approach of printing one out and handing it to you. It's something we keep online, and we constantly revisit throughout our engagement with you to develop those changes, develop plans for those changes that come about in life.
So you mentioned, we're taking into account tax law changes, we're taking into account market changes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Is this you and a team of people putting this together? Talk through how the analytical work is done.
Yeah, so let's take a look. If you look at the next couple of slides that I've got, we take the data, and this is an actual. It's a sample, obviously, but it's an actual printout from the analytics we get. And when you look at the top left of that, that shows a graphical illustration of those life events that we talked about: retirement, post-retirement, testamentary. Just a quick graphic of some data through the process that we use. And really the second page is the most important. When I talked about, if you flip to that next one, Clint, what this next slide shows is really what I talked about with the concrete versus the abstract. We want to get this to a concrete, to get all those questions answered on a year-by-year basis. And again, the analytics that go into this, we're taking into account actual taxes, both income, capital gains taxes, all those elements that go into this, inflation rates, rates of return on portfolios. And it gives us a graphical illustration, as you can see, through 2054 in this case, that can give us some very concrete illustrations of what your financial condition looks like. It takes away all the guesswork, and it's real critical, we think, to develop this. Go ahead.
So if I'm coming to this from more of a cynical mindset, I see a bunch of numbers on a page. If you were kind of got some pushback from someone who you developed a financial plan for, saying, okay, that's great, that's a lot of numbers on the page, but where does the confidence in the creation of those numbers, where does that come from? How would you answer that?
Yeah, so we never want to develop a financial plan using data that would be, pie in the sky or aspirational type numbers. What we want to do is use this as a tool. The proper way, I think, to use this is to be very conservative, in the sense that we want to really probably overstate things like inflation and understate things like portfolio returns. We know that we're going to get higher portfolio returns than what we actually plug into this, but for some of the unknowns, you get a protracted downturn in the market, and people are near retirement or close to that period where they're going to stop having the regular earnings. We want to have a baseline for them to have the confidence that, yes, I can do what I want to do, and that I'm going to be safe in doing that and taking on retirement, for example. So this is really not necessarily an aspirational illustration. It's more of a baseline illustration of what a client would look like, and that's the tool. That's how we use it in that sense. Now we can run scenarios with more realistic, maybe higher returns, maybe some lower inflation than we've experienced recently, but this is the first cut of it, the first baseline look at it that we want to have, so that we can start those conversations. It does pare back the anticipated risk too for a client, so we can show a client that, hey, you don't need to necessarily take a whole lot more risk assets on in your portfolio to get you where you need to be. We can get to this baseline number and take a lot less risk and get you where you need to be ultimately.
So Tim, we've got a question, and I think it's related to the slide we've got up on the screen. I'm assuming it is. The question is, in the wealth planning process, are all assets taken into account, or just assets with WealthSouth?
No, all assets, absolutely, positively. We want to have a full picture of your financial condition. Now, in some cases, you have people that, for example, a real estate investor who may have a smaller proportion of portfolio assets, the financial assets. When you look at this particular slide, we're really focused on financial assets, assets with stocks, bonds, and cash that are involved in this. But a lot of times people's situations are different. They might have a huge portfolio of real estate. And we'll use different metrics and different analytics when it comes to a person that maybe has a higher proportion of other types of assets, privately held businesses, for example. A lot of people build their wealth through their business that they own. So we'll use different metrics, different slides for this, and plug in all that data again with some conservative estimates to get us to a baseline. So yes. We're looking at financial assets. We're looking at all assets really when it comes down to this, not just the assets held at WealthSouth. It's real critical because we know a lot of people have sizable 401ks that we don't manage here, and we want to incorporate those absolutely positively in this.
Getting back to the analytics for a minute, you mentioned taking the conservative viewpoint from just a return perspective. I assume that the scenarios that are generated, those aren't necessarily conservative as much as they're historical.
Correct.
So in this case, we're building plans today or last year or whatever it is. It would contain historical simulations of downturns that are maybe not exactly the same, but similar to the one that we're experiencing or that we recently experienced.
Absolutely, something like the COVID. Absolutely, the COVID, or something like that. Those black swan events, those are incorporated into this. We never again want to have anything with this kind of linear, beautiful picture of every single year looking the same, and that's one of the things I think we need to talk about is when we do these.
That's called the Madoff scenario, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah, certainly not a Madoff in this, but downturns of 20-25% of those magnitude, those are incorporated into this. So we don't want to go into a plan without having that data loaded into the system, that potential for a 25%, even a 2008 scenario where we're down more like 40%. Those are incorporated into this planning, again, because we're talking about people's retirement, people's lives, and their life savings, and that has to be included in this. And any plan that we've done in the past that we're doing now, certainly those type of scenarios are loaded into it automatically. We want to consider those scenarios as outcomes potentially for what our clients will experience, as we have recently.
Very good. Well, I think that's a great summary of just what goes into this and how reliable these are. I do want to, before we start to wrap up, I do want to pause for a second and give people the opportunity to submit more questions if they're out there. And so as we wait for people to submit more questions, we teased at the outset that we're going to be talking about what do people need to assess, what do they need to focus on given recent market events within their financial plans. So Tim, what are those key things, those key measures that people need to take a look at this time?
Sure. You should always revisit the plan. And certainly we do. As a client of ours, we're going to revisit that plan every single time we meet and probably 5 or 6 times.
When you say revisit the plan, just break that out a little bit. What do you mean by revisit the plan?
We want to update numbers, get the numbers. The software has the ability to pull financial data from all your investment accounts automatically. Some people choose to do that, some don't. So we want to update the numbers that are in that if it's not automatically being done. It's really good when they are because it gives us up-to-date numbers every single time we meet. But running different scenarios, what happens if, for example, we have some protracted inflation? is it going to have a measurable impact on the financial outcomes 20, 30 years from now? Do we need to look at the overall, when we get a downturn like this, a lot of people reassess their overall risk posture. Do we need to reassess the risk posture and see, maybe move toward more of a baseline risk posture versus maybe something that's much more of a return-based posture? All those conversations, again, they're ongoing. And those are the things that we need to incorporate anytime we do get into the plan. We certainly need to revisit it after this this downturn. But again, what I think is real critical is that we have baked this scenario into the outcomes. So if you've had your plan done in the last year or two, this type of scenario has been baked into it. So no need for panic, but maybe reassess where you are. Make sure that the outcomes are still on par with what you want to accomplish in the end.
So Tim, we've got another question, and it just relates to spending. So obviously, cash flows may have changed. What would we advise on spending? Are we saying, you need to cut back right now? Are we saying, let's look at the plan and see what you can still draw, and maybe your spending doesn't need to change? Is there a stock answer there?
There's really no stock answer. Everything's pretty much customized to your individual circumstances. So I know we've talked in the past. Certainly nowadays, there's a lot of noise on the internet with information coming out. I've seen some things that say now is the time to convert your Roth because your portfolio is down. It's a good time to do this or a good time to do that. I can't emphasize enough that all those things that are out there, it's a lot of noise, and until you actually run a particular scenario for that individual and their individual circumstances, you really don't know what the outcome is. So I would encourage people not to necessarily get caught up in the top 5 things that you need to do given this downturn, but to look at it much more from an individual standpoint. Let's run the numbers. Let's see if it makes sense to convert. Most of the time when I've run those scenarios, I get just the opposite answer, because a lot of the dynamics aren't incorporated into some of those articles. They use very static numbers. They don't use inflation and tax information. Those variables aren't incorporated, and they're really not taking it out long enough to see what the long-term 35 year differences are among those possible outcomes. We can certainly do those. Absolutely, we can run all different types of scenarios and compare them to the base that we've got. That's a real easy thing to accomplish with software that we use, and it's certainly something we want to give people. Again, take away that abstract and make it much more concrete to compare it side by side. Which outcome is best? So
I guess the overall advice is maybe take a conservative posture, but if you're truly concerned, revisit your plan.
Yeah, and it's kind of a long way of getting back to the actual question, which was, do I change my spending patterns? It's really important to look. Certainly, I'm always in favor if you can cut back and put more towards savings for these types of events. You weather the storm better, much better than others that don't. But by the same token, you don't. I think this is going to be a short event. It's going to have some long-lasting consequences, certainly from a fiscal standpoint, from governments not having enough tax revenue, that sort of thing. We don't know what those outcomes are going to be 3, 5, 10 years from now. I'm always in favor of saving more if you can. When you do save, there are more appropriate vehicles than others when you look at them objectively. But again, I think it goes down to your individual circumstances. A lot of it goes down to not just the objective measures like we talked about before, but subjective. How do you feel about your liquidity position? Some people like to have 6 months of liquidity in cash, and I understand that completely. Some people like to have 2 months of it. Some people use an equity line for it. All those things are really individual circumstances, and I hate to be wishy-washy on it, but it's a really good time to revisit that if that is a question you have on your individual circumstances. Absolutely. Very good.
Well, Tim, thanks so much for taking the time this morning and providing us with all this information. Anything you want to leave everyone with before we start to sign? Oh, wait a second. We did just get a quick question, which I know is near and
Sure.
dear to your heart. What's the fee for a financial plan?
With no fees. Anytime if you're a client of ours, and even if you're not a client of ours, a lot of times we will do these for clients that and non-clients who have questions about what they do. It is something that other firms generally charge for. Usually what you see out there is if it's free, it's designed to give you a certain answer. For example, a lot of insurance companies use these, and guess what? The answer is going to be you need more insurance. You're underinsured. These are designed to be unbiased. You can take these, use them how you want. There's no charge.
So Tim, I know you've talked about putting these together, giving them to the CPA, giving them to the attorney, even giving them to an outside financial advisor, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, this is supposed to be an unbiased, and it is an unbiased look at you, and how you use it is up to you ultimately. One thing I did want to touch on too real quickly, Clint, a lot of our clients will have significant assets held in their 401ks and their IRAs or their SEPs. You know, if your assets are held here, we're automatically rebalancing things throughout this process, and usually what you see is a rebalance when the market's moving upward. When stocks are growing like they had been prior to this COVID challenge that we've encountered, those assets, the risk assets like stocks, tend to get to be more of a proportion of your total portfolio. So if you started out at a 60%, 40% portfolio, they might have grown to a 70-30 portfolio with stocks growing as a larger proportion. Well, the corollary to that, or the opposite of that, is when the stocks do go down. It's really critical that you rebalance those back upwards. So we had a pretty significant downturn. If those assets are held elsewhere, like your 401k, it's really critical. This is the time to rebalance back up. So if you were at 60-40 to start out with in your 401k, and now you've gone down to 50-50, you need to rebalance upward back to that 60-40 level. Buy those stocks now when they're lower priced. It forces you to buy low and sell high. And that's a real critical piece of this. If you're doing a disciplined investment approach, which you should be doing, it's really critical to start balancing those back upward, especially in those places where you don't think about it, your 401k, your SEP, your IRA.
Well, as I told everybody at the outset, I know this is something that you're pretty passionate about, how it functions and how it gets people to the right outcome. So thanks again for being on today. And if clients have questions, they can certainly revisit this video or reach out to us directly at the office.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
And thanks to everybody who attended. We appreciate you taking the time out of your morning. Did just want to remind you that this video, our previous video, and all our communication is housed on our website, so you can access that at your convenience. Also wanted to go ahead and tee up our webcast next week. We're going to have James Faraday, our Chief Investment Officer, and part of his portfolio management team on. They're going to be talking a little bit about what has happened, but really focusing more on what we do with that data and some of the things we expect going forward based on what we've seen. So hopefully you can take time out of your day next Wednesday and join us then. Until then, we hope everybody out there stays safe, and we look forward to seeing you next week. Take care.